The dust-choked wind of Red Rock Gulch whipped around Alara, tearing at the frayed hem of her dress. Her 2 children, pale and skeletal, huddled against her voluminous skirts, their small hands clinging like burrs. The air was thin, tasting of iron and despair. For 3 days, they had existed on the fringes of this dying town, drawn by the desperate hope of a passing stranger, a kind face, anything more than the glacial indifference they met. Alara herself, a woman built for endurance rather than daintiness, felt the gnawing emptiness in her gut, a hollowness that echoed the void where her husband and home had once been. Her broad shoulders, once capable of lifting bales, now slumped under the invisible weight of failure and fear. She was not a woman who easily bent, yet the world had found a way to grind her down, leaving her here, a bulky shadow against the harsh sun, by what passed for a café, a ramshackle building with a warped sign promising coffee and grub. The promise felt like a cruel jest. Inside, through the grimy window, she could see the silhouette of a man. He had been there for hours, a lone figure nursing a chipped mug, his gaze occasionally drifting to them with an unnerving steadiness. He was a widower. She'd heard the whispers. Kai, they called him. A man of the high country, rough and unburdened by pleasantries. He was everything she was not, self-contained, solitary, seemingly untouched by the world's cruelties. Yet, his gaze held a peculiar depth, not pity, but a stark, unsettling recognition. Alara straightened, pulling her children closer, a futile attempt at shielding them from the world, and from him. She had learned to distrust any gaze that lingered too long. The door creaked open, spilling a sliver of the cafe's stale warmth onto the street. Kai emerged, a tall, spare man with eyes like flint under a low-brimmed hat. He moved with a quiet economy of motion, his boots kicking up small puffs of dust. He stopped a few paces from them, casting a long shadow over their small, huddled group. Alara braced herself, her heart thrumming against her ribs. She prepared for the usual pronouncements of judgment, the dismissal, the cold turn of a heel. Her children whimpered, sensing the unspoken tension. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of question or warmth, yet not unkind. It was a statement of fact, immutable as the mountains surrounding them. There was no offer of explanation, no gentle persuasion. It was a grim ultimatum, born of a brutal necessity that transcended niceties. Alara stared, her mind a whirlwind of fear and a sliver of desperate, unbidden hope. This wasn't an invitation. It was an abduction, yet it carried the faint scent of salvation. Her stomach clenched. Was this a devil's bargain? A trade of one kind of desperation for another? But what choice did she have? The children shivered, their small faces upturned to her, their eyes mirroring her own fear and profound exhaustion. She looked at Kai, searching his unreadable face for a hint of malice, a flicker of deceit. There was none, only a weary resignation, as if this act, whatever it entailed, was as inevitable as the setting sun. She swallowed, her throat dry, the dust-choked air suddenly too thick to breathe. The unspoken agreement hung between them, a fragile bridge built on nothing but the shared understanding of a world that offered no quarter. He turned without another word, walking towards a lean, dun horse tethered near the livery. Its saddle held a bedroll and a rifle, suggesting a long journey, a solitary existence. He mounted with practiced ease, then looked back at them, waiting. Alara took a trembling breath, her gaze sweeping over the desolate town, the empty street, the sky that stretched endlessly, indifferent. There was nothing for them here but starvation and the cold embrace of the earth. She gathered her children, one hand finding a small, trusting palm, the other grasping a thin shoulder. With a heavy, resolute step, she began to walk, following the silent stranger into the vast, unknown expanse beyond Red Rock Gulch. The sun dipped lower, casting long, distorted shadows, and the wind began to howl its mournful song. This was not an escape. It was simply a change of prisons, or perhaps a desperate flight into a different kind of wilderness, one where the rules were unwritten, and survival was the only currency. The journey was a crucible of silence and dust. Alara rode perched precariously on the back of Kai's horse, one child cradled in her lap, the other clinging to her side. The rhythm of the horse's hooves became a hypnotic thrum against the vast quiet of the plains. Kai rode ahead, his back a rigid line against the immense sky, never looking back, never speaking a word. Alara studied him, her initial fear slowly giving way to a grudging observation. He was lean and sinewy, his movements precise, his awareness of their surroundings absolute. He seemed an extension of the land itself, harsh, unforgiving, yet undeniably capable of sustaining life, if one knew how to read its cryptic signs. Her mind was a relentless churn of questions. Where was he taking them? What did he expect in return? Her husband had taught her the world was a transactional place, but this man offered no terms, only an unspoken command. Yet, with each mile that passed, a different kind of understanding began to form. He stopped for water at unseen springs, his eyes scanning the horizon for unseen threats. He shared his meager rations, offering a portion without fanfare or expectation. He built a small, efficient fire at night, casting their temporary camp in a flickering orange glow, and somehow, the chill of the desert nights became a little less biting. The children, initially wary, began to regard him with the curious, trusting gaze of the very young. Alara watched as her son, the bolder of the two, tentatively offered Kai a smooth stone he'd found. Kai merely grunted, but his large hand took the stone, turning it over before slipping it into his pocket. It was the slightest of gestures, yet it spoke volumes in a landscape where words were often unnecessary. As the sun began its descent on the third day, a distant smudge appeared on the horizon, slowly resolving into a lone cabin, nestled against the foothills of a ragged mountain range. Smoke curled lazily from its stone chimney, a beacon of improbable warmth in the desolate expanse. This was home, then, not the home she had known, filled with the bustling chaos of her family, the familiar scent of wood smoke and baking bread. This was a stark, solitary dwelling, a testament to one man's stubborn will against the wilderness. It was the kind of place where softness went to die, where every day was a negotiation with the elements. Kai dismounted, his movements fluid despite the long hours in the saddle. He didn't offer a hand, but Alara found her own strength to slide from the horse, her tired muscles protesting. The children tumbled down after her, their small legs unsteady. The cabin was built of rough-hewn logs, sturdy and unadorned. Inside it was Spartan. A rough-hewn table, a few stools, a stone hearth that dominated one wall, and two narrow bunks built into the other. A silence settled, thick and heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the children's soft breaths. "Water," Kai said, gesturing towards a bucket by the door. "Wood piles out back," his words were clipped, economical. He seemed to expect no less than her immediate understanding and compliance. Alara looked around, her eyes taking in the details. A stack of cured hides in one corner, an axe leaning against the wall, a few well-worn tools. This was a man who lived by his hands, and who, she suspected, expected the same of anyone under his roof. She was a robust woman, strong and capable, her frame built for hard labor, not delicate adornment. It was a truth she had always known, but one that felt profoundly significant in this new, stark reality. The unspoken message was clear. There would be no handouts, no pity. Survival would be earned, day by day, by the sweat of her brow and the strength of her will. She felt a strange surge of something akin to grim satisfaction. After weeks of begging and charity, the prospect of earning her keep, even under these harsh, unspoken terms, felt like a return of dignity. She nodded, her gaze meeting his for a fleeting moment. In his eyes, she saw not judgment, but a recognition of her own inherent strength, a silent challenge that she was, perhaps, capable of meeting. The children clung to her skirts, their wide eyes reflecting the flickering firelight, innocent witnesses to this quiet, fraught beginning. The first weeks at Kai's remote homestead were a rhythm of brutal labor and profound silence. Elara found a grim satisfaction in the work, the physical exertion a balm to the churning anxieties of her mind. She hauled water from the spring, chopped and stacked firewood with a methodical strength that surprised even herself, tended a small, stubborn patch of garden Kai had started, coaxing life from the arid soil. Her body, once weary and aching from starvation, rediscovered its formidable endurance. She was not a woman who withered. She was built to withstand, to endure. Her robust frame, once a source of quiet self-consciousness in a world that prized delicate femininity, became her greatest asset here, a testament to her resilience. Kai was a man of routines. He left before dawn to check his traps, returning by late afternoon with whatever the land reluctantly yielded. Their interactions remained sparse, built on necessity rather than conversation. "Food's ready," he'd say, or "Mending that fence needs doing." Elara would nod, understanding the unspoken expectation, the quiet demand for competence. Yet, within this stark framework, a tentative understanding began to form. She watched him, learning his ways. The way he sharpened his knife with quiet precision, the way he mended a saddle, his hands surprisingly gentle as he tended to a sinew. And he, in turn, observed her. He saw her unwavering dedication to the children, the way she hummed a tuneless lullaby as she patched their worn clothes, the fierce protectiveness in her eyes. He saw that her strength was not just physical, but a deep, unwavering wellspring of will. One particularly harsh week, a late spring storm blew in, relentless and unforgiving, trapping them in the cabin for days. The wind howled like a banshee, battering the log walls. A vital section of the roof, weakened by age, began to leak, a steady drip threatening to ruin their meager supplies. Panic gnawed at Elara. They could not afford to lose anything. Kai, usually so composed, looked grim. He had to go out. "I need to secure the tarp," he stated, his voice barely audible over the gale. "It's old, might not hold." Elara felt a sudden, fierce protectiveness rise within her. He was risking himself, not just for the supplies, but for the fragile shelter that now housed her children. "I'll help," she said, her voice firm, surprising herself. He looked at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his flinty eyes. "It's dangerous," he warned, not unkindly. "The wind could throw you clear off." "I'm not made of glass," she retorted, a flash of defiance in her eyes. "And these children need a roof over their heads." She grabbed a heavy coil of rope and a hammer, her movements deliberate. He hesitated for a moment, then gave a curt nod. Together they battled the storm. The wind screamed, tearing at their clothes, blinding them with dust and rain. The roof was slick and treacherous. Elara, despite her bulk, moved with an agile determination, bracing the tarp as Kai hammered in the nails, her stout frame a defiant anchor against the gale. Her hands grew raw, her muscles screamed in protest, but she held fast, her gaze fixed on the task, on the children waiting inside. Hours later, soaked to the bone and shivering, they finally secured the roof. The leak was stopped. They stumbled back into the cabin, exhausted but victorious. The children were asleep, oblivious to the battle waged above them. Elara sank onto a stool, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Kai knelt by the hearth, stoking the fire, its warmth slowly seeping into their chilled bones. He looked at her then, his gaze direct and steady. "You worked well," he said, his voice low, a rare acknowledgement that felt heavier, more meaningful than any elaborate praise. A quiet current of understanding passed between them, a shared sense of accomplishment that transcended words. In that moment, the cabin, once a place of stark necessity, felt a little more like a home, forged not of wood and stone alone, but of shared struggle and unspoken respect. Elara felt a quiet strength unfurl within her, a knowing that she was not just surviving, but truly living, building something from the wreckage of her old life. The memory of the storm, and their shared struggle against it, became a quiet cornerstone in the fabric of their lives. The initial, stark necessity that had brought them together had softened, imperceptibly, into a form of kinship. It was not a relationship built on grand declarations or tender affections, but on the enduring strength of shared purpose and a profound, unspoken respect. Alara no longer felt like a refugee, but a partner. She knew her place, not subservient, but essential. Her robust build, her capacity for hard work, her unwavering will were not merely tolerated. They were valued. She had become an integral part of this remote world, her presence anchoring the cabin, transforming it from a solitary outpost into a haven. The children flourished under this quiet, consistent care. They chased lizards in the sun, learned the names of the local birds, and discovered the particular comfort of Kai's weathered hand when he helped them bait a fishing line. He rarely spoke to them directly, but his actions, the carefully whittled wooden bird, the extra portion of stew, the patient instruction on tracking, spoke a language they understood. Alara often watched him with them, a quiet warmth unfurling in her chest. He was not their father, and would never replace him, but he was a protector, a quiet anchor in their young lives. One evening, as the last sliver of sun painted the western sky in hues of bruised purple and gold, Alara sat on the small porch, mending a torn canvas bag. Kai sat beside her, whittling a piece of cedar. The air was still, save for the distant cry of a coyote. She thought of the desolate street in Red Rock Gulch, the cold indifference, the gnawing fear that had been her constant companion. She thought of her husband, gone too soon, leaving her adrift. A deep sigh escaped her. Kai paused his whittling. "Thinking of leaving?" he asked, his voice low, not accusatory, but with a quiet, almost hesitant curiosity. Alara looked out at the vast, silent landscape, a landscape that had once terrified her but now felt like a familiar, if demanding, friend. She looked at the sturdy cabin, at the small, flourishing garden, at the children sleeping peacefully inside. She thought of the shared meals, the shared silence, the unspoken language of work and perseverance that had bound them together. "No," she said, her voice clear and steady. "There's nothing left for me out there but the same empty road. Here is different." She paused, searching for the words, for a way to articulate the profound shift that had occurred within her. "Here I feel useful. Oh, it's hard, yes, but it's real." She turned to him, her eyes meeting his. In their depths, she saw a flicker of understanding, a quiet recognition of the shared burdens they had both carried, and the surprising peace they had found in this harsh existence. "You gave us a place," she added, her voice softening, a quiet acknowledgement of the lifeline he had extended. He resumed his whittling, the rhythmic scrape of the blade against wood the only sound. He didn't offer grand speeches, didn't need to. His silence was his truth. But Alara saw the slight tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. The wild land had been their cruel master, but it had also, unexpectedly, been their forge. It had stripped away all pretenses, leaving only the raw essence of survival, and from that, a new life had begun to grow, rooted in the dignity of resilience and the quiet strength of an improbable, enduring connection. The future remained uncertain, as all futures were, but they would face it, together under the vast, indifferent sky, no longer just two individuals and two children, but a family, forged in the crucible of necessity, bound by an unspoken understanding deeper than words. The quiet optimism of the setting sun on the horizon promised not an easy path, but a path nonetheless, walked with newfound strength.